Um, but Stan, you've had sort of extensive experience in the life science space. So you'd be interested to hear some of your background as to how you were appointed CEO of Thomas Scientific and who they're owned by and how that sort of process went really.
Sure. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. And Rich, I saw you there. It's good seeing you. The so I first got involved with Thomas Scientific when the Carlyle Group, one of the largest private equity firms, had acquired Thomas Scientific from the Patterson family. And so Thomas Scientific is next year will be a 125-year-old company, but for the longest of time up until 2017, it was the Patterson family ran it, did a wonderful job with it, but wanted to maintain it as a smaller regional distributor of scientific products. And but then they had two manufacturing divisions, and they then through some of the efforts of the former CEO of Thomas, they had decided to sell off the distribution side, and that went to the Carlyle Group that acquired it. And frankly, for Carlyle, it was a smaller acquisition, but what they saw was a great opportunity to take a Thomas as a platform company and then to be able to accelerate the organic growth and then the add-ons and the M&A side of it. And so I have had extensive experience in this industry, almost 30 years with VWR International, a large multinational distributor. And so they had asked me to join the board. Carlyle did. And so I did that for a year, and during that time, we had acquired four different companies. And they said, well, Stan, would you be willing to also join the management team in the chief operating officer role? Which I did late in 2018. And really, it was all about making sure that we could, a number of us have come to Thomas to build a great company founded on a wonderful culture. And that's first and foremost. And then how do we professionalize? How do we scale the business? How do we grow organically and continue to grow through M&A? So I took over the CEO role in February of last year. Mm-hmm. And really has been wonderful journey of a career. I have a great passion for science. My undergraduate degree was in microbiology, and then got my MBA when I realized being a scientist was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and kind of merge business and science together. And I've been fortunate and blessed that I've been able to stay in this industry and really serve the scientific community.
Okay, brilliant. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about Thomas in a minute, but just give us a feel for some of the other roles you did sort of previous to Thomas.
Sure. I was, as I mentioned, I was with VWR for a number of years and started out on the sales side and then moved over to operations, running operations. One of the common themes across my career has been when something isn't either working overly effectively or whether it was an opportunity to build a better leverage and grow and professionalize a certain part of the company. VWR had kind of moved me across different parts of the organization. I think sometimes I was pretty vocal about what wasn't working well. And they said, well, if you're going to be vocal about it, then go figure out how to fix it. But that's always fun for me. One of the examples when the services organization that was embedded into the sales team and moving that out to be able to create it as a separate business unit, I ran their pricing organization, ran strategy and business development, their global sourcing organization. That really got my initial experience and subsequently the interest in the international side of the business. And I concluded my career with them running the Asia Pacific business, which my family and I were living over in Shanghai, which was a wonderful, wonderful experience for us as a family. So it's this journey that was kind of woven throughout all the different parts of the business, excluding HR. I think that they were smart enough to know me being involved with HR probably wasn't the best thing. But all these different areas really have helped me tremendously to grow my abilities and capabilities now serving in this CEO role.
You mentioned your time in Shanghai. I mean, do you have any sort of advice for anyone who's sort of thinking about trying to get some more international exposure and potentially have an opportunity to live as an expat?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And even before living over there, when I was running the global sourcing organization and having teams spread throughout Asia, but headquartered out of VWR's corporate headquarters, and I really moved into that role because of some projects that were short-term projects, and I was interested in it, raised my hand, said, hey, I'd love to be involved with it. And that kind of so where those opportunities exist, even if it's a short-term project, and if individuals have an interest in expanding outside of the North American realm, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful way in which to start getting exposure to it. And ultimately, it led to me being able to run the global sourcing organization and really, for the first time, beginning to really start to recognize the importance of leadership teamwork around different cultures. And, so whether it was the India team with the China team, and we all know some of the geopolitical differences over time between those two, and how that permeates into individuals' thinking and actions and trust or lack of trust. New Zealand and Australia teams, or South Korea, or Thailand, Malaysia, all of those different teams, Singapore, being able to lead in an effective way that really harness the power and the magic of the people, but being able to bridge some of those cultural gaps was, frankly, some of the more challenging times that I've had in terms of leading and learning. But it's been a wonderful experience.
And is it your, I mean, without wishing to delve too much into sort of geopolitics, I mean, obviously, since COVID and more recently, there's a slightly maybe different perspective on China now, and particularly in the life science space. Is it your sense that if you were to try and do the same role today, it would be a little bit more challenging with the relationship?
That's a great question, Andy, because I've spoken to my wife and our family about that. So we were over in China in 2013, 2014 timeframe, and we still have some connections back there. The dynamics and the number of expats that are there now and what there were then, a lot fewer expats now than what there were. And some of the it's a very, very challenging, China in particular is a very challenging environment, especially when you're working for a multinational, because you have to operate under the multinational rules. And especially in the scientific industry in China, it's a highly, highly fragmented, small regional companies, but literally thousands of distributors. And they all have their geography that they've carved out, and they've also established their local relationships and not necessarily operating under the same rules as a multinational. And so the discussions I've had with people over there, it's gotten even more and more complex for a multinational to really operate within the guidelines and the rules versus even just 10 years ago.
Yeah. You sort of operated under a number of different private equity owners, Carlyle, Madison Dearborn, now bought Sky Partners, current owners of Thomas Scientific. What have you sort of found? I mean, they're very different outfits in terms of their size and scale, and I'm guessing how they operate. How have you sort of found yeah, working for the different masters and how you sort of had to adapt to that, and
Yeah, no,
without talking out of school too much, obviously.
no, that's all right. The yeah, and when I think about my exposure and into the private equity world, it first started when CD&R, large private equity firm, had carved out VWR from, at that time, Merck, the owner over in Germany, not Merck in the US. And so that was an experience where CD&R, very large, lot of internal resources, operating partners, two individuals, operating partners that were officing out of VWR's headquarters, so highly involved. I would say highly invasive, but from a good perspective, because as a carve out, but then also seeing that there was untapped potential, and how do you kind of shake the rust out of the organization? How do you really position it for growth, both organic and then add-ons on the M&A side of it, and even just challenging processes that existed that people initially were very protective, because GWR had not been owned by private equity before, so a lot of people didn't, including myself, didn't know what to expect. But in that case, it was really about changing a lot around process, around frankly management, around technology and ability to scale the business in a much more effective way, and in a much broader international scope as well. So that was on one end of the spectrum about CD&R. And then when it was sold to Madison Dearborn, because CD&R did a lot of the heavy lifting, their profile as a PE firm was really more about the financial side of it. And the majority of the daily, weekly contact was with the CFO and the finance organization, because again, CD&R did a lot of the heavy lifting. So MDP wanted to harness the organic growth and the investments that were made, and that was an effective hold period for MDP. And so those very much contrast each other in terms of not only their approach, but MDP did not have operating partners. They had advisors that were part-time people that you could tap into. And so that was a very, very different business model. And so, and then when Thomas was acquired by Carlyle, I would draw that analogy more to an MDP type of relationship. And Carlyle was extremely, extremely supportive of the investments into the organic growth. There were into the M&A, and really their Rolodex, so to speak, of advisors that they would provide access to on certain topics that we had either were making investments on, or challenges that Thomas had at that time. And then when Thomas was sold to BroadSky, it was actually two of the partners that were involved with the original acquisition under Carlyle of Thomas. They went and started their own firm, BroadSky Partners. And so the great thing was that we didn't have to train another private equity firm of who Thomas was, right? And what our position was in the marketplace or anything like that. It really came down to quickly agreeing on what those key investments that we were going to do to create value for the organization. And BroadSky has been a wonderful, wonderful partner. We're investing in a lot of different ways to really continue to scale and professionalize the organization, bring analytical insights into the company to make faster decisions. M&A continues to be an important part of the growth story. And so BroadSky is one that, from my perspective, takes the best of both worlds, because they're the individuals that we worked with at Carlyle, and during the rapid growth that we had under Carlyle's ownership, and now under BroadSky, that they know Thomas, and they saw the the way in which that we operate, the things that we needed to have to be able to continue to grow and serve the customers, and within an environment that they're extremely supportive of those investments. I would say patient, but not too patient, because as you're making investments, everybody knows you need a return. And in the private equity world, those of you who have operated in it know that time is not your friend. The sooner you get value creation, the better.
And obviously, Broadsky had a good amount of sort of institutional knowledge before they went into it, which, I mean, they must have had a lot of confidence in you and the team. But is it your sense that their business plan has sort of changed or evolved from, private equity always starts out with an ambitious business plan when they do a purchase, but it very rarely sort of ends up being the business plan they end up with. So is it your sense that their investment thesis has changed as you've gone along?
No, it frankly hasn't, because the value creation initiatives that we agreed on. So Thomas was acquired by Broadsky in December of 2022. And so in January, we met with them for a couple of weeks to determine what were those value creation initiatives that we were going to run after together. And things like expanding our North American distribution infrastructure, improving our digital capabilities, replatforming our ERP to what is a dated 12, 13-year-old ERP. We'll be launching the new one in a next quarter or so. M&A, looking at different ways that we can either move into adjacent markets or to be able to better fill opportunities within our product portfolio by acquiring distributors who had certain manufacturer relationships that Thomas didn't have. So these different value creation initiatives are still the ones that we are very focused on and have made really great progress on. What has changed is as the industry surged in general during COVID, and then what I call the post-COVID hangover, and trying to the industry in general, with customer ordering patterns being disrupted, and in the biotechnology sector, where funding there was more difficult, and so some of these different dynamics that were happening, their hold period will ultimately be longer, I think, than what they expected. I know. But it's not around the core strategies or the value creation initiatives, but really now making sure that, ultimately what Broadsky, what their investors, the types of return. And so ultimately it will require a longer hold period than their initial assumptions.
Yeah, sure. And when you stepped up as CEO and sort of president, what were what has sort of been your main priorities, and are you trying to change the culture? Or, I mean, you've been there for a while, so you're obviously familiar with the culture. What's been the things that sort of keeping you up at night?
Sure. Two different questions. One is because what keeps me up at night can change from quarter to quarter, but nonetheless, yeah. So moving into the position, one of the things that when I met with Tyler and Adam, the two partners at Broadsky, one of the things that I mentioned to them is that, and related really to these value creation initiatives, what I saw in my COO role, where I felt that we could be more effective as two companies working together, was really to start to create some better definition between the two organizations about where I felt that Broadsky could add the most value into a specific value creation initiative, based upon either if they can bring additional capacity to the organization, expertise or experience, and said, all right, this is where I want you to be directly involved. And these are the areas that will keep you informed, but we don't need for you to be involved with it. And as long as we're keeping you informed and we're making progress, then you can use your resources elsewhere. And so that was a really good way in which that we gained agreement really early in my tenure about how do we make sure that we're not going, finding ourselves going against, not purposely, but just by being involved with things that really doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
Because Thomas has it, and unless we're not executing well, then they can focus their resources elsewhere. And so that was an initial part that really helped to free up for us our ability to frankly move more quickly on certain creation initiatives that otherwise were, I think, moving at a slower pace or with more complexity than what needed to. And then it also brought better clarity for them about, hey, we didn't really realize that you could have used us in this other way to be able to further accelerate a certain value creation initiative. So that was a really important first stepping stone from my perspective to bring that clarity. And then, I'm extremely passionate about culture, whether it was at VWR or whether it was initially here. And that continues to be front and center, whether it's in our organic initiatives or whether it's through M&A. The first lens I always look at for, again, target M&As is there a cultural fit? If there's not a cultural fit, frankly, I move on because there's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing that destroys value more quickly than a disconnect on culture.
Mhm.
And, I start my day when I'm not traveling. I start my day here at the headquarters and 6:30 in the morning out with the warehouse team because there's the way I'm a big believer of leading by example and walking around and engaging with people. And that's my leadership team operates and works in the same way. And I think what we get out of that is a much, much more engaged company across all of the different departments and the associates feeling like that, that their opinion matters, which it really does, because there's nobody that has a better insight into what the customer wants and needs than the associates that are closest to what happens on a daily basis. And so we as leaders should, my opinion is, me as a leader, the thing that I need to be focused on is serving those in a way that puts them in a position to be successful. And the best way to understand that and to do that is to understand where the associates are coming from. And so that has been a way in which that I've not only led, but in some of the changes that I've made within the leadership team, really looking for that type of a leader. And so that's been really important. And one of the things that I felt like we needed to be doing differently, and so subsequently made a change and brought in some different people, was really about our sales leadership style, our way in which that we needed to make sure that how we were either our organizational design, our priorities within the sales organization, our use of analytics tools that helps the sales organization to be better, develop their priorities about how they could serve their customer and how they could engage with them, how they could identify opportunities. And so that was really important to make sure that we had the right leader within the sales organization to serve the individuals that were the sales management team and the sales reps that were out there, that put them in the best position to be successful. And so that's been where I spent a fair amount of my time in probably my first 6 or 8 months.
Mhm.
And we're beginning to see the the benefits of that because of the leaders that we have now that are helping the sales team.
Right, right. Now we have a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe we just take one of those now. So Darshan asks, love to hear how you use due diligence partners and advisors. And as part of that, maybe one of the things I'd be interested to learn as well, you mentioned, you've been making and certainly looking at a number of sort of acquisitions. So be interested to hear how you sort of source those opportunities
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe from a process perspective, how we source them, a couple of different ways. One is we do have a third party that helps us as we define what is it that we're looking for, what is the criteria of either end market or certain geographies or products that we're interested in becoming better at, or brands that are really important. And so that third party then does some of that initial sourcing, and then as a management team, we then engage with the founders, the owners. And so that is one way that we use advisors or a third party, and kind of on the sourcing side of it. And some examples of, so we acquired 3 companies last year, one back in August of 2022 as well. So 4 under the Broad Sky ownership. And one of them the one back in August was Thomas was not good at all in microscopy, especially higher end microscopy. And that's, those of you who've been in the scientific world, that microscopy is one of those core technologies that kind of cuts across most end markets. And so we had acquired a company that had a great brand in Leica, and built a wonderful services organization for not only the initial installation of high-end microscopy, but then the maintenance, repair, and all of that. And so that filled a product category void and brought in a services solution that, while Thomas sold microscopes in the past, not effectively, and certainly not with a services arm to it. Last year, we had acquired 2 distribution companies up in the Boston area that were specialized in serving critical environment production customers. So think about medical device, semiconductor, bioprocess manufacturing. And so that's been a wonderful acquisitions as more reinvestment back into the U.S. for semiconductor, if those of you who stayed close to the CHIPS Act and all of the new semiconductor plants that are being built throughout the U.S. and EV battery. So it really aligns very, very well with the investments back into the U.S. of those technologies. And so that's an area that either through relationships that we have with certain companies, and so we source them in a proprietary way, or through third parties, we continue to look at how we build our capabilities, continue to build them within that critical environments production area. And before we started the call, I was speaking with some gentleman about the, as healthcare, as medicines become more personalized because of gene therapy and cellular therapies, that the advanced bioprocess production, as that becomes cell and gene therapy productions. I saw Rich on the Zoom here, and Azure has a great business model about being able to provide clean room production areas for cell and gene therapy and bioprocess. And so that's just expanding marketplace that is really interesting to us. We had acquired a company last October where Thomas had some products that went into the forensics marketplace, forensics testing, but really didn't do a good job at it. So we had acquired a company in Kansas, a really wonderful Arrowhead Forensics. And unfortunately, crime is something that will always be around. And so now, whether it's providing products to law enforcement for sample collection at the crime scene, the transportation of it to the lab, the testing of the lab. And so, we, as a management team, we source that in a proprietary way, had relationships with them. We have our own organization that is, for our size of a company, we have a lot of experience with the due diligence. So most of the due diligence, we have our internal teams do that due diligence. We do for quality of earnings, we do have a third party that does that work. And we do have a third party from an advisory perspective that does as the internal team does all the due diligence work and feeds that into this third party to develop the data packs and some of the consolidation of the information that allows us to be able to ultimately work through the deal and to be able to make sure that from a funding perspective and all of the financial parts of it, we do have an advisor that we work with for that. But once we get to acquiring the company and then the integration work, the majority of that is done internally. And from the 8 acquisitions that Thomas has done since 2017, we really have had a great core group of people who have learned a lot, and now we can scale very, very quickly these integrations. And thankfully, without a lot of disruption during the time of the integration.
Right. And are you typically rebranding these acquisitions under Thomas, or do some of these businesses
good question.
Sort of more standalone?
Yeah, it really all depends upon their equity in their space. So Arrowhead Forensics, their brand is well known within forensics, that we have no interest in rebranding it to Thomas. Some of the acquisitions that were under the Carlisle ownership, because they were more like a distributor like Thomas, they were a regional distributor out west, for example, then we did rebrand to Thomas Scientific.
Yeah. Okay. And then we got a question from Christina. I'll just read it. What do you think resonates with the management team of a PE acquisition in terms of the requirements and scope of process and system improvements? In our business of digital transformation, we often find that clients overestimate their data process and system functionality and performance.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So a few things. One is the last part of that. We from a digital perspective, and yeah, I mean, data. Thomas has over the years had not invested into the robustness of its data, the completeness of it, and so that being, if you don't foundationally have that in place, whether it's on the product side, the customer side, then all of your efforts from a digital perspective are suboptimal. And so there's been a fair amount of work there. There's been, as we are upgrading our ERP, we are bringing on a new website, a new platform for the website. Thomas's sales through digital channels is probably about 40% of our sales, something like that. And so, as everybody knows, as the younger generations become more impactful in purchasing decisions, research, and ultimately purchasing decisions, we have to find the most effective way to be able to communicate, to market to them, to be able to provide value and information, especially a scientist who is inquisitive and wants to be able to do their own research and to be able to ultimately make purchasing decisions. As a former scientist, I get sometimes how they think, and so that's helpful sometimes in terms of how we then align our resources. But that whole digital piece is a huge area of investment. We hired a chief digital officer the first time the company has had that type of a position and resources for it. So, but the management team has been, really in alignment with Broad Sky, and especially since we have great alignment around these value creation initiatives and what we're going to do. And by that, it also says what we're not going to be spending time and money on, and where we're not going to be investing resources. And so the management team has, especially as we've made some changes with some individuals, I brought in a new chief technology officer, and really bringing some new perspectives, some new kind of standards in terms of what we should expect in terms of our capabilities, different than maybe what were the paradigms that existed in the past. And so by working in that way, in a highly defined way with Broad Sky, and then also ensuring that we free up the time of the people internally to be able to make sure that we can really deliver on these investments. It's been for while we can always improve, no doubt about it. We've got a lot of things going on and still effectively growing the business and creating the value at whether it's in the P&L or whether it's a balance sheet, and ultimately for the in terms of the customer relationships and customer retentions.
Okay, great. I'd be interested to hear a little about one of your previous times. If I got this right, I think when you were at WWR Scientific, that the company grew from about 200 million value to about 4.2 billion, and went from sort of being very domestically focused to sort of very international. So just be interested in, I mean, that's pretty spectacular growth. I'm not quite sure how many years that was over, but the sort of the lessons you took away from that experience. And
sure. Yeah, so it was over probably about a 25-year period, something like that. Some of it clearly through acquisitions, some of it just through organic growth. And when I started with VWR, the thing that was really my first job out of school, right? So as a sales rep, but the thing that really, aside from that, I could stay within the scientific community, the fact that it was an organization that was highly, highly focused on the customer, that was, making decisions on a daily basis that were where the environment was about being nimble, about being fast and flexible, and creating this dynamic and culture that, frankly, a lot of what now I've brought to Thomas and others that we brought in the organization with that type of a culture. And so my belief is that when customers see that you're working in their interest and that you want to be able to bring solutions to them that are meaningful for them, they will reward you. And so that was a really important part of VWR's growth story, in addition to the acquisitions that allowed us to go from a U.S. North America centric organization to a global one. And so as I moved away from VWR, one of the things I wanted to do, and a number of us that used to work at VWR and are now at Thomas, we really wanted to create a company that was more like what the former VWR was in terms of the culture. And we felt that there was an opportunity to really create, there's two large multinationals in this industry, and while I respect them highly as competitors, we really felt that there was a great opportunity to build a third option for customers. And while Thomas focuses a lot in the middle market customer base, small, medium, large, and we will, I think, in a very discerning way, when a large multinational wants us to work with them, if we are aligned in our values and expectations, great. If what we're going to be is just a third bid on their list, then we thank them for the opportunity, but say, no, that's really not in our best interest. And so that growth at VWR is really what, not necessarily our objective is not the growth, but our objective is to serve the customers, serve our associates, build this, continue to stay disciplined around our culture, no matter how big we get. I'm a big believer that the financial results are really an outcome of what you do from a culture perspective, how you align your priorities, how you determine where you're going to allocate your funds, and then the execution around that. And the numbers in the P&L and numbers on the balance sheet then are just fallout of how well you do those other things.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. You mentioned earlier that Broad Sky sort of exit horizon's probably longer than they envisaged when they went into it. What do you see as their sort of exit path, and is there any sort of specific considerations when you're looking at an exit in the sort of life science space, specifically?
Yeah, so as you would expect for any portfolio company owned by private equity, there's always generally two different options, whether it's to sell to a strategic buyer or whether it's to another financial buyer, right? And so, where we end up, no.
Time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. You're absolutely right. And so clearly those will be one of the two exit strategies. And the for and any of you who've been in private equity know that there's that create value early, create a sustainable and scalable financial results, and quarter over quarter, so that there's whoever the interested buyers are can look back for trailing 12 months and say that there's certainty in that revenue and EBITDA stream that they can then have confidence in. And by having confidence in that, and by being able to show that the growth is absolutely sustainable and that you've positioned your company into end markets where there are tailwinds versus headwinds. And so some of our M&A activity is to really bolster our capabilities and our position in end markets that are growing, so that we've got a company that is really foundationally strong. Some of these investments in ERP and digital and all that is about the foundation that allows for scale and end markets that strengthen our position in these growing end markets, that then ultimately when we have that for a number of successive quarters that are strong, then that provides Broad Sky the flexibility when they decide that it's the right time to begin to market Thomas, then that's under, then they have that flexibility. And ultimately, in our industry, for a value-added distributor like ourselves, that 10, 11, 12 times EBITDA is kind of the market. And if we acquire companies at 6 or 7, there's a natural kind of leverage that
value accretion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so all of those things go into ultimately what the exit strategy will be that Broad Sky determines. But there's nothing more important than putting points on the board with successive quarters of strong results. And fortunately, we've been able to do that. And I think that we're positioned well to continue to do that.
Excellent. We have another question in the chat from Drew, who says, of the acquisitions, what's the track record for ones that were extremely successful versus okay versus really missed the expectations? Drew says in his experience, it's 1/3 each. I'm not sure.
I guess if I look at them, we're more blessed and fortunate than the 1/3 scenario. There was one early under Carlyle ownership that didn't really end up with, it was the first one. It was a carve out, and that was one where I mentioned earlier about, you can destroy value when there's a disconnect in the culture. And it was a carve out, and the individuals that were running the business quickly exited on, in a short period of time. And so there was a lot of.
So, Stan, when you say it was a carve out, what do you mean by that? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. So the distribution arm was owned by another company, and that was a manufacturing environment. And so they wanted to sell the distribution arm. So what Thomas got was basically the book of business, the one distribution center, not the systems and all of that. So you had to bring that company in to quickly into Thomas's systems, into Thomas's financial organization, all of that, and as opposed to acquiring the whole entity, including its systems. But we've been, aside from that, which, after the first year, we're actually able to get back on track. But all the other ones have been highly accretive to the organization. So we've been fortunate. But I go back to that, we've walked away from probably, my guess is probably 30 different opportunities we could have done. That the reason we walked away was because of a disconnect in the culture. And as long as I'm in my position, that will be that. If we can't overcome that in the early discussions, then no matter how sound the business seems to be or the end market that it plays in, I'm just not interested in trying to overcome that cultural hurdle, because I just don't believe that let me say it a little differently. The risk of destroying value, in my opinion, is so significantly high that it's very difficult to overcome that.
And how easy is it to get a real sense of the culture you're buying when you make an acquisition?
Spending a lot of time with the founder, because it all starts from the top, and and certainly the management team. But you get I think I've got a talented group of people that can help me to be able to discern whether that cultural fit is there or not. And fortunately, we've been, one of the things that we really encourage founders is to stay on. We don't want them to just, sell their company. They've built a great company. If we really believe that, I guess if we didn't believe it, we wouldn't acquire them. But we want them to stay on. We want them to roll equity into the broader Thomas organization, so that they want to be a part of the value creation over time. And so, when we have those discussions with founders, you can really get a good sense as to whether that they're in it for their customers, whether they're in it for to come alongside Thomas, and Thomas helping them to scale their business. That's oftentimes the challenge for these founders, is that they don't have the financial resources or talent or processes or systems to scale. And when they want to scale the business and they see coming along, Thomas coming alongside of them, that when that energizes them, because they believe that they can do more for their customers, those are all the telltale signs, at least from my perspective, that my antenna goes up and says, this is the right type of a business I want to be associated with.
Okay. Now we've got a question from Rich here. He asks, given your sourcing background, how does Thomas approach strategic partnering with life science and biotech customers to drive growth, value, and mutual benefits?
From a sourcing, well, Rich, can you clarify that a little bit? Maybe I want to make sure I'm
I
not.
was tossing you a softball, Stan, so we could talk about how much I value the insights and your team in terms of trying to put together programs that provide mutual benefits.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, whether it's on the product side, whether it's on services that we can, core competencies that we have that we can provide to our customers, and maybe they don't have the infrastructure, the people, maybe they're an emerging, cell and gene therapy company that we can bring some of our inventory management skills, some of our logistics skills, some of our sourcing of new products for them. And, so with some of my prior experience, whether it's at VWR of creating the services organization, whether it's the sourcing organization, some of those things are, again, things being fortunate to be in those types of positions and now to bring that here and with the leadership team that I have, though that's this, staying focused on the customer. I try to keep things as simple as possible and staying focused on the customer, using our experience and expertise on behalf of our customers. That's when, we end up getting, being able to win in the marketplace with our customers. And that's very important for us. And
well,
what I would
I don't
say
want to
just,
provide another question, but I do want to acknowledge Stan. I've been in the supply chain business for 4 decades. I've been to 40 different countries and sourced products all over the world. And I've never worked with an organization that is as customer focused as Stan's is. The culture he talks about is top to bottom. And I just want to thank you for the attention that you pay to customers. There's one other guy that's really famous for paying attention to customers. He's recently left his organization in Seattle, but I see Stan thinking like Jeff Bezos thinks.
Wow, that's quite an accolade, so thanks for that.
maybe just one quick closing comment, from a private equity perspective, and those who've not maybe operated within private equity. Sometimes there's this perception that private equity is this, this evil empire that, all they're interested in is about, acquiring companies, ripping out cost and trying to engineer financially. And my experiences and kind of as now that I'm in my position, and if we were ever to move to another private equity ownership, that, the culture of that private equity firm is, again, equally important as in the same way that we think about, acquiring, companies to become a part of Thomas. So there are differences in private equity firms. There's no doubt about it. Increasingly, I think private equity firms recognize the value of operating partners and being able to add value into the portfolio companies. And it's not just about engineering, financial aspects of the company. And I really enjoy operating in the private equity world. It's fast, it's flexible, it's nimble. It's, yes, quarterly earnings are important, but they're not the only thing, versus a public company. And it's one that when you personally stay aligned with what the objectives are, and at exit, you are also personally rewarded for that. Not that that's the key driver, but when you create value, that you can personally benefit from that as well.
Well, I think that's a great place to finish. Thanks, Stan. And look, I really want to thank you for all your time today and for these very interesting and valuable insights. And thanks to everyone for attending. And have a great day, everyone.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.